I have a question here from Birdman. Birdman, not the cartoon / superhero, not the NBA player, but somebody named Birdman on Facebook says, what makes you identify more as a progressive than a classical liberal? All right, that's an interesting question, and it actually is a really long, complex conversation because political terms and definitions are always kind of shifting and changing as time goes by. So, speaking as somebody who has a political science degree and who's been heavily involved in politics for a very long time, when I see people refer to themselves as classical liberal, my first thought is they really don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Because classical liberal, the actual definition of classical liberal is basically libertarianism. Market libertarianism. So like a Ron Paul type character, an Ayn Rand type character. But today, now people have started using classical liberal to refer to not libertarianism, but somebody who is liberal on social issues, on gay rights, on free speech, on civil liberties, but on economic issues is fairly progressive and somewhat social democratic in their ideas. So still in favor of social safety nets, still in favor of regulating the market and stuff like that. So part of the reason I don't refer to myself as a classical liberal is that there's a lot of confusion as to which term you mean when you say it. As somebody who comes with a political science degree and a background, every time I read classical liberal or hear classical liberal, I go, you're talking about libertarianism and you don't even really know it, which kind of gets under my skin. So I'm not going to use a term that's confusing when I'm even confused by it now, because I have to discern when the person's talking, okay, are they educated on the topic and do they mean libertarian, or do they mean it in the new way that it's being used? And by the way, I'm not even saying it should go back to the original meaning, because it appears like that ship has sailed and classical liberal now means the newer, updated version of it, and it doesn't mean libertarian anymore. So I partially don't use it to avoid the confusion, but I also don't use it because it's not really all that specific and accurate as to my beliefs. It's a very kind of vague term, and somebody can read a lot into that. So if I want to be really specific with people and tell them what I am, probably the best way to describe it would be, I believe in social democracy, and I'm a libertarian leftist, and I'm a secular humanist, and I'm an agnostic atheist. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and that's 8,000 terms I just gave you, but that's the most specific way of describing my belief system. I don't think there's any word or terms that really encapsulate it all, but that's as close as you can get. So let's try to go through that. Social democracy basically means I believe in a hybrid system between capitalism and socialism, where aspects of the economy have the free market and have competition and have privatization, but also there are things that are off the table and they're socialist. So healthcare, education, infrastructure, military, police, fire department, the usual. Basically, it's the Scandinavian model. Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden. They're social democracies. They're a healthier mix of capitalism and socialism. That's part of my philosophy. The other part of my philosophy, I said, is libertarian leftism. Libertarian means on social issues, I'm libertarian, which means to each his own, do whatever the fuck you want. I'm not going to bother you. I really, really heavily lean on the side of freedom when it comes to social issues and when it comes to civil liberties, free speech. I'm a free speech absolutist, you name it. So drug policy, abortion policy, gambling, prostitution, libertarian on all those issues, do whatever the fuck you want. Leftist means leftist on economic issues. So like I was just describing, regulate the marketplace, make sure Wall Street, there are clear guidelines laid out there, you can't violate it. Obviously, have money out of politics, regulate that in a very rigid, strict way, make sure that's not violated. Corruption should be a huge, huge crime with very serious, severe punishments. Again, we should have strong unions. We should have a living wage that's a minimum wage. We should have universal education, universal healthcare, so on and so forth. Paid time off by law. Universal daycare is another thing that a lot of modern nations have that we don't even have that conversation in this country. So that's leftist economically. That's my belief there. And then what was the other? I said secular humanist, which I'm sure all of you know what a secular humanist is. I believe in humanism. I believe We should have a government that's not ruled by religion. That's secularism. A government that's respect individual rights and human rights and abide by fucking Magna Carta and the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal. And humanism is, I believe in human beings. I don't believe in deities and nonsense. I think we should actually try to work this out as human beings. And agnostic atheist also speaks for itself. That basically means I don't know if there's a God or not, but I actively don't believe in one because I don't see any evidence for one. So if I had to describe my philosophy and sum it up in a quick way, give you the Cliff Notes version, although I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, that's the Cliff Note version. I don't use classical liberal because it's confusing, because there are multiple definitions to it, and because it's really not specific enough. And so that's kind of why I avoid it. And by the way, the term progressive, I use interchangeable more or less with the word liberal. I know many people don't do that. And I know in some circles, progressive has been sufficiently demonized to the point where it is indeed not equated with liberal. In my mind and how I use it, liberal and progressive are more or less interchangeable. And when you hear me use the term liberal or progressive and I say, hey, I'm a liberal, or hey, I'm a progressive, what I'm really saying is, if you want to be specific, is everything I just laid out for you there. That's an attempt to encapsulate my philosophy of social democracy with libertarian leftism, with secular humanism, with agnostic atheism. I know it's a mouthful, I know it's a long conversation, but that's kind of my breakdown of it, and that's why I don't use the term classical liberal.